Hi, I'm Nicholas O'Sullivan, and this is Project Management in Government Procurements. So this presentation will provide you with an understanding of what a project manager's role is in the procurement process, and look in depth at some of the procedures and safeguards that exist within government for managing the procurement process. So I'll start by examining 6 main steps that are required for successful procurement management. Then I will look at my area of expertise within government in the state of Queensland. Throughout this presentation, I will also make note of some of the safeguards that exist within government, especially in the state of Queensland, for managing the procurement the procurement process. So please reference the handout you received for further resources on project management in government procurements. Making a purchase is simple, right? Have you ever had a problem with making a purchase online, only to find out it's not right or vastly different from the way it's described? So you take it back and ask for an exchange, only to find out you experience further issues. Well, quite simply, good project procurement ensures purchases that are made safeguard you as the buyer and the seller. So project procurement is the process through which products and services are evaluated or procured for your project. So let's start by examining 6 main steps that are required for successful procurement management. Planning purchases and acquisitions. So this starts early on in the project and starts with identifying the activities in a work breakdown structure that are suitable for outsourcing. These are commonly referred to as work packages. For example, the supply of office furniture or installation of electrical services. The actual process of determining what makes a good candidate for outsourcing is the build versus buy analysis. So this information is detailed in the project procurement plan. So planning and contracting. This process involves the actual planning and the planning of how you're going to ensure the product you're requesting from the vendor is what you will actually get. So this process involves creating the documents needed to inform the potential vendors that you're interested in purchasing. So there are typically 3 documents at this stage that I refer to as RFX for short. Request for information, RFI, request for proposal, RFP, and request for quote, RFQ. So typically the RFI is typically used when the buyer is determining who can supply the product or service needed. Whereas the RFP, request for proposal, is when a proposal is sought to a problem from an outside vendor that has the option of responding to the tender. So nextly is an RFQ, request for quotation. The document is used for straightforward purchases generally, such as the purchase of 50 computers to a certain specification. So requesting seller responses. So this involves sending out the RFX to potential suppliers. Now, a typical RFP or RFQ to a vendor invites the supplier to respond. Among the key parts of this request are things such as the date responses must be received by, how they will be reviewed. So selecting sellers. So this step involves evaluating the submissions received and determining which response best suits the proposal sought. It is important to check what you're evaluating in this step is what you have actually asked for. Always refer back to the procurement plan to ensure you're not tied to one seller more than another because of the added bells and whistles that can sometimes sneak into the proposals or quotes from other vendors. So the final step here is notifying the successful vendor and negotiating the contract sign-off. The next step is administering the contract. This step is vitally important. If close attention is not paid to the vendor selected for the procurement, things can go amiss. So keys to administering contracts for outsourced work involve communicating by collecting status reports on the outsourced work, completing regular walkthroughs, sending regular emails to the vendor to get an update on how things are going. All this should be recorded so that you have a record of all communication. Sure, you do need to communicate informally as well, but keeping all communication pathways open is generally the best approach. Other things that may arise during this process is change management. For instance, in the procurement of computers, a CPU may be end of life soon after the procurement contract is entered into. and as a result, the supplier is unable to source the original CPU. So this could be a potential problem, but if there is a clear documented change management process in the procurement plan, quick resolutions can be possible. For instance, in some cases, small changes may not need to go before a procurement review board. They could be dealt with the change manager by simply sending an email back and forth between the vendor and the change manager to get this approval. So closing the contract. This step involves reviewing the contract terms and comparing it with the results achieved. Once all parties are happy, final payments can be made and the contract can be signed off on by both parties. So I hope that this information has informed you of the role of procurement management in project management. I would never give procurement authority to a project manager. There was just too much at stake, too many non-technical matters to know, which most project managers typically are not prepared to handle. Procurement authority will be restricted to people who are familiar with contract terms, procurement regulations, funding, and contractual compliance issues. So these are the words from Quentin W. Fleming's book, Project Procurement Management. Now, if you're working with an organization to deliver a project, you're most likely going to have other business units such as sales, administration, and procurement. So bear in mind that when managing and planning the procurement process by preparing RFXs, you may be working with the procurement department. This isn't a bad thing because they're experts with what they do, especially when it comes time to negotiating the finer contract terms. Now, the role of the project team is to work alongside procurement and ensure they are aware of the specifications of what is required for the project. So my view and experience is working with procurement is great, but make your recommendations, but especially let procurement take the lead when it comes to the contract. But on this, discussing the topic of procurement management, what do you think happens in small organizations without a purchasing, contracting, or procurement department? I will answer this at the end of my presentation. So my background is that I was in small business for 7 years, and during this time I actually tendered and was successful for several projects, including the maintenance contract and tender to supply services to a regional Australian university based out of central Queensland. So this was my experience privately with procurement tendering. After departing from business, I started work with Education Queensland in a school senior ICT position, supporting about 2,200 students and staff. Now, in my role, I'm responsible for the development of the replacement strategy for approximately 150,000 of ICT assets, parts, and services each year. Now, in recent years, the Queensland Government has produced lots of materials on its procurement strategy. So this procurement strategy is used within all business units of the Queensland Government. So as you might have gathered, a big part of procurement is value for money. As seen from this quote, value for money and competition intricately connected, and maximizing competition in public contracting in the sense of there being more than one bidder is often touted as the best way of achieving value for money. So the Queensland Government has set up a procurement system that looks at 6 key areas that have been identified to ensure a suitable approach for procurements is taken in projects. So this is because the items that are listed here are key areas in high demand for government agencies. In fact, for the acquisition of information communication technology, purchases are expedited through the introduction of the Queensland Information Technology Contracting Framework. So this allows Queensland government agencies to select one of 4 contracting frameworks to engage accredited suppliers with for the supply of ICT equipment. So these frameworks are one of the safeguards that the government uses for procurements. So this framework for purchasing ensures minimal delays in procurement activities, especially in the procurement of ICT products and services. So key points on the strategy is a whole of government arrangement which involves looking at existing contracts with a government agency to determine if there is already an agreement with the supplier in place. Agency arrangements, which are agreements in place with certain businesses that may already meet the requirement to work within a government agency. And finally, going to market, which happens more often than usual. So going to market is simply taking the project you are managing that require products or services to the open market. More on this soon. So how is the procurement process exercised? Well, within each government agency is a purchasing and procurement procedure. This document's purpose is to describe the process of buying goods and services from suppliers external to the department. This procedure covers all aspects of purchasing except for real estate. In actual fact, purchasing as defined in Queensland is for activities up to the value of $100,000, whereas purchases over $100,000 are considered procurement. It would depend on the organization's size as to what is considered as simple purchases or procurement. So to actually work with procurements in a project in government, staff must be appropriately trained in purchasing. This is done through the use of expenditure delegate training. This is another safeguard that we have in government. So taking a project to market is where the skills of a project manager may have in procurement are put to good use. This is where procurement skills that a project manager has learned are put into practice. It is at this point where RFPs and RFQs are sent out to the bidders who are willing to tender the offer. In government and in business, it's best to get multiple quotes through RFPs and RFQs to ensure the project is getting the best value. In fact, rules are set out so that purchases under $5,000 require one quote, purchases $5,000 to $20,000 require 2 quotes, and purchases $20,000 to $100,000 require 3 quotes. These requirements for a certain number of quotes is another safeguard that exists within government procurement activities for projects. So one last point here. Standing offer arrangements. These are used within government organizations as well, and in the state of Queensland. So these allow for procurement processes to be bypassed, allowing the buyer to go straight to purchasing items from an already vetted supplier. So how is the procurement process exercised within a project? Well, there is a 4-step process highlighted here. Plan, develop, evaluate, and finalize. This 4-step process is essentially the same as what I've discussed earlier in this presentation, and I'll demonstrate this procedure shortly. So in a school year, I run several projects. There are many occasions where close attention is paid to how the item will be procured. A few of the projects I manage include the replacement of data projectors and the replacement of computers and servers. So the typical process in procuring products is seen here. So identifying the need, as you can see here, the example is noted in green. Defining the specification and requirements of the new system, meeting with purchasing delegates to create a risk matrix and finding an RFQ, RFP, distribution of the RFP, RFQ, and the receipt of offers, evaluation of the quotes and weighting of the seller responses. Using an evaluation technique, the tender is awarded to the successful bidder. Bidder is notified and contract is signed. Others are advised of the unsuccessful bid. Contract is managed to ensure parts and services are supplied, is what has actually happened, and the change management is completed or actioned if required. And finally, contract close and review. So project procurement is the process through which products and services are evaluated in order to be procured for a project. The objective of procurement management ensures both the buyer and the seller are protected should problems arise. Procurement ensures value for money in the products and purchases made for a project. Project managers need to have an understanding of procurement and practice, but more often than not, they work with procurement team for procurements. Government procurements have rules in place so that procurements for projects can be closely monitored. So questions to ponder. What happens in smaller organizations without a purchasing, contracting, or procurement department? Well, in smaller organizations, quite often, there may be people trained in procurement, or there may be a solicitor that works alongside the business on a contractual basis to give recommendations on the best terms of a contract so that the contract is safe for both the buyer and the seller. So how is value for money ensured? Through issuing an RFP or RFQ to multiple suppliers. Well, this simply allows more offers to be received for the project, allowing there to be more comparisons between the prices and the outcome of the product supplied for those. So is the separation of powers from the project manager and procurement team commonplace? Well, yes, from my research it is, and Fleming's book does appear to back this up, and from other persons I've heard in the field of project management, this does seem to be commonplace. So is it fair for suppliers to need to be certified in order to be selected as a supplier for certain products or services? Yes, I think it is fair because everyone can register for this, but they must meet requirements set out by the government department or agency in order to engage in business activities. So I think this is a good safeguard to have in place, ensuring that no purchases are made to perhaps a fraudulent business, which do come from time to time. So thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have further questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.